Hey there, internets. Try 3 on getting this recorded. So this week, this is going to be the what you voted for. Is this what you get edition with some really high tech notes because I was working across devices. So what caught my eye for this was an article on a copy of the Seattle Times, and I went back and investigated it from July 2023. It says Inslee lawmakers turn up heat on oil companies as Washington gas prices top nation. Well, this is called the Democrats' fault. Jay Inslee actually has the gall to say this. The spokesperson for Chevron the other day, it's not their job to go bankrupt. Inslee said at a news conference. I don't have a Nobel Prize in economics. I only have a bachelor's of arts in economics from the University of Washington, which means he's not using it if he's a Democrat. But I can tell you that the oil and gas industry is not going bankrupt. Well, they might not be going bankrupt, but he does not understand how businesses work. But this man's a professional politician. This Thursday's news conference was met with quick pushback from Western States Petroleum Association and some Republican lawmakers. And I'm pushing back here, too. You start digging, you find out that they're full of crap. Because what Inslee is going to do, and first time I recorded this, I ended up way too long. And now I'm doing this at even later because I'm having to make 3 tries. So all links will be in the description below. The first 2 articles will be from the Seattle Times. The first article includes some comments from. Both articles have comments from Senator Nguyen, who's one of the Democrats' chair on environment and energy, about how they're what we're asking for is radical transparency. We want radical transparency as we work toward a cleaner, greener economy. We want to make sure everybody, especially those who are burdened by pollution, are part of the solution as well. We just want stakeholder capitalism, which is third way stuff, which was tried once, in the lead up to World War II by several countries. And most of those countries were on the losing side. And it gets into, trying to make it, look like it's a big thing about where flight paths are. Well, flight paths are going to be lower priced houses, regardless of any racial redlining in the past, and because nobody wants to live there. So, in the second article from the Seattle Times dated the 14th, you'll actually see the chart tracing the two. But Yahoo Finance, they had an article from last year, and I thought it was relevant because how does oil measure up? Yes, they took 196 billion. The top 5 companies had 196 billion of profits, but most of it was driven by increased production. Does not mean that their profit margin just went through the roof. And of course, this is, the whole oil industry isn't just those 5 biggest companies. But over their profit margin in 2021 was 8.3%. It was forecast to be 10% in 2022. Chevron's margin in 2021 was 10%. Its forecast for 2022 at that time was forecast to be 11.8%. And I did not dig into whether that actually came out that way. ConocoPhillips was projected to be pretty big, but everybody needs fuel, so it's an easy punching bag. And you hear these horrendous, huge numbers, 196 billion for 5 companies. These are global companies for one. They're doing business all over the world, multiple companies. They are huge. So just by volume, they're going to be big. And I'm going to get into some of their corporate reports to where this isn't quite as outrageous. The oil industry is one of over the last 10 years for performance as a sector. Out of 11 sectors, they're number 10 as far as their stock performance and profitability. But in the top one was financials, and it had like a 25% profit margin for financials. Apple bested all of the oil companies with a 26.6 profit margin in 2021. Drug giant Pfizer did too at 27%. Citigroup, same with a 29.3% profit margin. Nobody's complaining about those companies, but they're complaining about oil because Democrats don't want you seeing what their policies have the effect on your life. Most of us, we buy a phone every couple of years at best. If you really like an iPhone or you get a deal like I did last time I needed a phone, you get an iPhone. It's a prestige brand. Otherwise, you buy the $100 Android and you don't even notice Apple's profit. So, and out of those 11 sectors in 2021, the average profit was 10.6%. And when you get into the some of these this cap and trade program, Washington Policy Center, this would be your fourth link. The State Department of Ecology released their second auction of allowances, and these allowances, they got so much from them they can do another sale, but that ends up coming off of later sales that don't get to happen. That's part of how this works. So it's just a band-aid to try and bring prices down on the short term, which means they're just trying to get reelected. It translates to about 45 cents per gallon for gasoline and 54 cents per gallon for diesel. In comparison, California is paying $33 or $30.33 per metric ton of carbon. So we're paying $56. They're paying $30 and change per metric ton of carbon. Guess why their prices might be lower than ours now? And understand the oil companies have tried to bring more production online. ExxonMobil added another 250,000 barrels per day of production. I think it's per day. It's not convenient for me to check, but it's in the Exxon corporate report if you want to read that. So going through those corporate reports, some highlights. For ExxonMobil, quarter one of 2023 was actually lower profit than quarter four of 2022, but before taxes, their profit margin was 19.4%. Before taxes, after they paid $4.9 billion in taxes, so they are not neglecting to pay taxes, they had a 13.2% margin after taxes. Their total tax bill, including sales taxes and other excises, was $19 billion. So that's spread out all over other things. So if there's a tax on carbon, if there's a tax on their property, those kind of taxes, those are the taxes they're paying into the public coffers. And their total revenue was about $86 billion in that one quarter. So out of that $86 billion in the quarter, some of which could be written off as expenses when you talk total taxes, it was they paid out almost $20 billion in taxes. Gives you a little perspective there. When you go into Shell, Royal Dutch Shell, they had $86 billion in revenue, which was they had 86.959 billion in revenue, 74.667 billion in expenses. Their net before taxes was 14,395 million. They paid out 5.582 billion in income taxes. After taxes, they had 8.709 billion, which was a 10% margin. Not an outrageous profit across that whole company. Chevron had 49.24 billion in revenue, net income of $6.55 billion, and a 13.35% margin. Again, not outrageous. Not outrageous at all. And some people might say, well, they're just taking too much out of Washington. What you got to understand is that they have to make a profit in Washington too. Walmart tried to keep their stores open in places like Chicago and Portland and San Francisco. And they finally pulled out of Chicago and said, look, it can't be profitable. No way. Why did they pull out? They couldn't make money. They were losing money year after year after year, and the other parts of the company were subsidizing the stores in Chicago in some hope that at some point it would turn around and they would start making money. They never have. They never did, and now they shut them down. Everyone's like, how could they do this horrible thing and shut it down? Well, guess what? Guess what's going to happen if you push oil companies for Washington and California on their and say they're making too much profit? Eventually, they're going to say, screw it. They're going to shut it down, and then they're going to leave. And for those of you in Washington watching this, that means our property taxes will go up. I was on a committee selecting a new assessor, and we were trying to learn what the assessor does. In Washington, we have a weird property tax structure. We have a budget-based structure where they say, we're going to get our pound of flesh, and the assessor's job is just to figure out what part of the pound of flesh you're supposed to give up. If one of the refineries here in Skagit County disappeared, just gone, that budget doesn't go away, that part of the budget. No, it gets redistributed to everybody else. The tax increase that citizens of my county would see is greater than the county commissioners could raise our taxes. So, and at that time, this was about 2010, they thought about actually shutting down a refinery and dismantling it. One of the companies said this is too close to the edge of not profitable and not making sense. That's the impact something like this has. So this is literally the Democrats created the problem. Now they're trying to blame somebody else for the problem and make themselves the solution to the problem that they created. And of course, all these corporate reports are linked in the description below. And finally, the Senate Republican budget leader, where is, I don't want to mess up her name. Linda Wilson of Vancouver said this: the governor and Democratic lawmakers should be stepping forward and taking credit for Washington's nation-leading gas prices instead of denying responsibility, says Senator Linda Wilson of Republican Vancouver. Wilson, budget leader for Senate Republicans, responded to claims made today by Governor Jay Inslee and high-ranking Democratic state lawmakers that they will propose legislation to rein in the outrageous profits of oil and gas companies. She offered this statement: it's really something to hear the governor talk about holding anyone accountable when his own administration mismanagement just put our state's taxpayers on the hook for a $100 million fine. And the Democrats sure have trouble keeping their story straight. Last month, one of my fellow senators was admitting how incredibly expensive it is to produce gasoline. Today, he was singing a different tune. The fact is, everything the private sector does gets more expensive when government gets involved. No one questions that land use restrictions and other government regulations drive up the cost of housing. Why would gasoline be any different? As I've said before, anyone with the slightest grasp of economics has to know that forcing companies to buy carbon allowances from the state would eventually hit consumers. It's not a surprise. The truth is, the governor and my Democratic colleagues were simply less than transparent in 2021 about the obvious consequences of their carbon pricing scheme. They knew full well that this would raise the cost of gas, which is part of the agenda to push people away from internal combustion engines and into either electric vehicles, which is their let-them-eat-cake solution, or public transit, which is go live in the pods and eat the bugs, do not live out in the countryside. Now it seems they don't want to be accountable for their intentions or their actions. Instead, they want to complain about oil company profits, even though their cap and gouge policy has made it possible for the state to do its own profiteering. Like $850 million just from 2 auctions of carbon allowances. Republicans recognize the financial hardships families are facing between fuel and other energy costs, the cost of housing, and the new payroll tax. We will continue working to control and lower the cost of living in our state. In the meantime, Governor Inslee and the Democratic majority need to own what they've done to increase gas prices, even if it makes them unpopular. And they do need to own it. And you know who also needs to own it? all the people that voted for this. If you voted for Democrats, you voted for this. If you failed to vote because you didn't like the choices or what good does it do, you voted for this. Not voting is surrender. You get out, you vote, you put a stop to this, this can change. So, that is where we're at. You want to know why gas prices are so high? That's what's going on. The proof is right there in the reports. They are all linked in the description below because I come with receipts, not just the paper kind. So you can peruse them at your pleasure. You can look them up and see exactly what it is. Not, a 13% profit margin does not sound much to me on $10 worth of gas. After you take out the taxes, that's less than $1.30 of profit. If you had $10 worth of gas for no taxes on it, you'd be talking $1.30 profit out of $10. That ain't much profit. It's a good profit in the grand scheme of corporations, which average about 6%, but it's not gouging anybody for profit. This isn't 100% profit margins or any of that sort of thing. So that's where it's at until I have returned to give you another video. Like, share, subscribe. It helps the algorithm. It helped me out. Even if you're just commenting to fuel the algorithm. And until then, you all take care.